Thanks for joining us. Coming from a former state prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, what are 6 things that you need to be learning from the Rittenhouse trial? The case of Kyle Rittenhouse has been such a big case for so many reasons. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of politics that have been really baked into the pie here, so to speak. But from a legal perspective and what can be learned for responsibly armed citizens, there is so much to break down. Let's take these one at a time. Number 1, it's very clear for anybody who is watching this trial that both the prosecutor and, frankly, the defense attorney knew precious little facts about how firearms, including AR-15s, actually work. We saw also the fact that people don't really know all that much about how ammunition actually functions. We saw a prosecutor refer in open court to the fact and, in essence, argue while cross-examining Mr. Rittenhouse that hollow point bullets explode. His words, not mine. And full metal jacket bullets, well, those are the ones that are actually designed to go through people, right? Again, his words, not mine. What do we need to take away from this? Well, it's worth pointing out something that the defense actually pointed out in their closing argument, which is the fact that, to a degree, it almost doesn't matter whether or not you use hollow points, full metal jackets, whatever might be appropriate for whatever particular firearm, because rest assured, an aggressive prosecutor is coming for you. Now, I'm not saying that that's fair. I'm just saying that's the way things obviously are. That being said, there's a lot that we can do to actually limit that blow against us. We need to be smart about using the proper ammunition for the proper firearm. This includes avoiding things that may have scary names, may have scary images on the box, because we already see what they're going to try to do if you're doing everything right. Now let's imagine that you are willing to do something wrong to give them an opening. Bad choice. People also assume that, hey, look, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and my defense attorney, it's their job to push back. That might be true, but as we all saw, pushing back, not as easy as it sounds. And by the way, you're assuming that you have a defense attorney who's knowledgeable and experienced about firearms, ammunition, and all the related equipment and accessories that perhaps we all know about. Don't assume that that's actually the way things are going to happen in your court. Don't assume the prosecutor is going to give you a fair shake about your choices and your preferences. You need to make sure that you're as smart as possible to give as little bit of a footprint, legally speaking, as possible for them to go after you on. How about that old myth that we always keep hearing? How does it go? Well, if you're in trouble, just shoot him in the leg or in the arm. We've seen how this plays out. Mr. Rittenhouse used arguably the least force necessary, or at least the least force that was available to him at the time when confronted with arguably a deadly threat in the form of someone pointing a firearm directly at him and then advancing. He didn't do a center mass shot, he actually shot him in the arm. Now, whether he intended to or not, that's not really for me to say and not really the purpose of this video. What I want to point out is the fact that he did what many people are always saying you should do. Don't shoot to kill, just shoot to stop by, shoot him in the leg, shoot him in the knee, shoot him in the arm. How did that work out for him? He was charged with attempted first-degree homicide. That's how that worked out for him. So it's something to keep in mind next time someone says to you, well, you didn't have to shoot him center mass. You could have shot him in the arm or in the hand or something like that. Legally speaking, while it may help, it's not going to necessarily be the get out of jail free card or the get out of trouble free card you might think that it is. Witnesses are going to be witnesses. What does that mean? If we've got 10 witnesses, we're probably going to get 15 different accounts of what happened. One for each person. And then some people are going to change their story and, change their story. We saw this play out in this trial as well. 2 things that I really want to focus your attention on, though. One involves Mr. Gage Grosskreutz. In his initial report to police, he omitted, whether by lie or just because it happened after surgery and he just forgot, but nonetheless, he omitted to law enforcement that he actually possessed a firearm at the time of the shooting, let alone the fact that he was actually pointing it either directly at the defendant, Mr. Rittenhouse, or at least close enough to being pointed at directly at him. We also know that, of course, at trial, Mr. Grosskreutz testified under oath that he directly pointed the firearm and advanced to Mr. Rittenhouse prior to Mr. Rittenhouse firing the shot against his arm. That's all good and fine, but we only know that now because there were numerous different camera angles. What happens if there were no camera angles? Now we have Mr. Rittenhouse and the defense and possibly other witnesses trying to put that firearm back in Mr. Grosskreutz's hands at the moment of the shooting. Imagine how different this case might be if the prosecution was trenched in around the fact that Mr. Grosskreutz, he never possessed a firearm, and Mr. Rittenhouse shot a totally unarmed man, a medic no less. That's a very different case. Mr. Rittenhouse was saved by the fact that there were numerous different cameras and videos running at the time to make sure that that firearm was in Mr. Grosskreuz's hands. At the filming of this video, we actually don't have a verdict out in this case, so I don't know how the jury is going to respond to everything. But that doesn't matter for what I'm talking about here right now. What I'm talking about here right now is the fact that witnesses, they'll lie. They'll forget things. And don't assume that just because something happened in a, maybe, arguably, in your case, a very clean-cut manner of, hey, this was self-defense, that's how all the witnesses are going to be testifying. The second thing I want to draw your attention to was, of course, what was being argued about at closing, as well as during the opening of the trial. Arguably, from the defense perspective, Mr. Rosenbaum made a very personal death threat against not only Mr. Rittenhouse, but another witness, Mr. Balch at the time, who had been accompanying Mr. Rittenhouse that evening. He said something to the effect of, "If I catch you alone, I'm going to kill you." At trial, we saw the prosecutor push back against this hard and made, to be fair, a very accurate observation about the fact that it's by no means uncommon at homicide trials that people try to put words in a dead man's mouth. After all, if those are the only witnesses, hard to refute. So it's understandable that maybe some bad actors may try to practice that from time to time in order to save their own butts. Now, of course, I don't know what actually happened there that night, but that doesn't stop us from learning the lesson. Let's say Mr. Rosenbaum actually did say those words. We have a trial now where this is something that the prosecution might be trying to put someone, or they are trying to put someone, behind bars for life, saying that, you know what, that never happened. You have to be careful. It's going to be important to document things. My suggestion is if you can avoid a conflict zone or if you can avoid dangerous situations, great, don't go. If for whatever reason you find yourself stuck going there, bring a recording device like a GoPro or something that can always be on. That way, there's no disputing what happened. Cell phones, drones, Google search results, browser histories, you name it. It's all going to come into play, and it may come into focus in your trial as well. Something that we saw here was, of course, virtually unprecedented use of FBI drone surveillance footage taken from multiple different angles, both in infrared and normal, to see what was going on that night. We've seen the prosecution's case, again, this was filmed prior to the verdict being read, really come down solely, it seems, to these camera angles. That can be a little scary for numerous different reasons. One is the fact that a camera, look, you ever watched a sports game where you're arguing with your friends about, hey, the football got into the end zone. Oh, no, it didn't. Now we're talking about the fact that someone might be going to prison for the rest of their life based on the outcome of that argument. Don't get me wrong, cameras are fantastic, and as a defense attorney and former state prosecutor, I absolutely love them. However, we can't be blind or naive to the fact that they don't tell the whole story. And we certainly saw that in the fact that both the defense and the prosecution gave radically different claims about what we were all seeing from the same camera angle. Also, keep in mind as well that live witnesses from the scene gave some testimony that may have colored that, but the prosecution utterly ignored that at closing as well. Cameras are great, and you need to act like you're always being filmed if, God forbid, you ever find yourself in a situation, whether it's like this or any other deadly force event. But keep in mind, they may not always save you, and they may not show things the way that you remember them, for better or for worse. We also saw the lines between firearm, equipment, tactics, and law continue to blur. And this should really come as no surprise of anybody who's been watching basically the series of self-defense law develop across many different criminal court cases, really over decades. A couple things I want to focus your attention on. Obviously, let's start with the fact that the prosecutor made a big deal about the fact that This was an AR-15. This wasn't your uncle's shotgun or something like that. This was one of those evil black rifles. Now, on the stand, when the prosecutor said, "Why didn't you bring a handgun?" Mr. Rittenhouse had a great reply of, "Because that would have been illegal, sir," or something like that. But it doesn't change the fact that we have to accept, and again, I'm not asking you to like it, I know I don't, but if you choose to use an AR-15 as a personal defense tool, there's going to be a price to pay for it in court. Sorry, hate me if you must, but that's just the truth. And that's not the way it ought to be, it's simply the way that it is. So another thing I want to focus on, and I'm going to tie these 2 points together, is the fact that Mr. Rittenhouse had to use 4 shots against Mr. Rosenbaum. Now let's just assume for a moment that he actually had to use all 4 shots, not that he was going to shoot, reassess, and so on, like the prosecutor said he should have done. Right. But let's say he actually did have to use all 4 shots. 3 wasn't enough because it didn't stop the threat. 5 would have been a homicide. 4 is good. All right. Anecdotally, I've heard from folks who have served over in Iraq that when you're talking about an AR-15 or M16, M4, for our purposes, all more or less the same platform, particularly from close range. When we're talking about full metal jackets, 3, 4, 5 shots, by no means uncommon to stop a threat. But let's think about the legal liability and the legal issues that that introduces. We already have an AR-15, which is going to predispose the prosecutor to all the arguments we've all seen. It may also turn off certain jurors, let alone the media. But if it's going to take 3, 4, 5 shots to neutralize a threat, even if it's close range, is that necessarily, from a legal perspective, going to be the best self-defense tool? Look, I'm not saying don't use one for self-defense. After all, hopefully a good shoot is a good shoot. But we do have to face the reality of the fact that in a perfect self-defense shoot, if I'm the criminal defense attorney, I'd rather have somebody who shot once rather than 2, 3, or 4 times. And again, I'm not saying that's fair, but that is the truth. So what does this all mean for a responsibly armed American? I'm not saying get rid of your AR-15, let me be clear. But also don't blind yourself to the arguments that real prosecutors are using in real cases. If you decide, weighing the pros and cons, you want to stick with an AR-15, God bless, good on you. However, if you want to take a little bit more of a conservative, cautious approach, it may be time to, take a look at some of the shotgun options that are out there, especially those firing 12 gauge with an 8 or 9 pellet double-aught buck. What you post on social media will come back to haunt you. Something that the prosecutor just kept coming back to throughout this trial, whether it was the opening, the cross-examination, or the close of the case, was of course Mr. Rittenhouse's, at this point, closed social media accounts. What was the name of it? 4 doors more. What was something else the prosecutor kept coming back to? A tagline that Mr. Rittenhouse had in there. Just trying to be famous. Of course, to be even-handed about this, Mr. Grosskreutz also had some social media dust-ups, though not his own, but something that a former roommate actually posted that the defense tried to squeeze some mileage out of on cross-examination. Whether you agree with the fact that these things should be used this way, again, completely besides the point. But unfortunately, how many times have we been on some sort of firearm discussion thread, whether on Facebook, whether on some sort of popular forum or platform, and we saw people make comments like, just bury them in the back 40, and hey, there's no witnesses. These words are going to come back to haunt them and may prove deadly when those are the first words that a jury's going to hear in the prosecutor's opening argument in their own jury trial for self-defense. Again, I'm not saying you don't have a First Amendment right, but this is how it's going to come back and haunt you. Just keep that in mind whenever you're posting something. Hardware counts, but software does too. A firearm is a tremendously powerful tool, possibly for good or evil, depending upon the individual who's wielding it. But I have another, arguably more powerful tool than that. Our brain. We need to fill it with as much education and training as possible. Hopefully, we can either identify these situations that we shouldn't be in and get out of them, avoid them, ideally, in the first place, and make the best possible decisions to not only physically survive the encounter, but also legally as well on the back end. Mr. Rittenhouse made a series of critical mistakes. And to be clear, many other individuals did this night as well, but I want to focus on him for a moment. Obviously, showing up that night where we all knew that there was going to be some violence and conflict, look, I understand what he was trying to do in the best of light. He was trying to protect a community that he loved, that he lived effectively in. I get it. I'm not trying to take anything away from that argument. Of course, many other folks look at him as a vigilante. I'm not trying to wade into that discussion right now. Entirely besides the point. My point is the fact that if you lay down with dogs, you're going to get fleas. What am I talking about? If you're going to go to a chaotic situation where there might be serious repercussions, both physically and legally, for going into them, don't be surprised if you unfortunately get a really bad series of repercussions and consequences for going into them. And again, I'm not saying that that's fair. I'm not saying that it's fair to let communities burn. I'm not saying anything of the sort. I'm simply saying this is the truth, whether you like it or not. And I may not like it any more than you do, but it is something that we do have to factually as well as legally accept and embrace. Even so, if we look at his specific actions that night, he received a call from his friend to go put out a fire at the CarSource 1 lot. Rather than asking for more help, although he did ask one person to come with him, and they didn't, at that moment he should have said, no, I'm not going through that crowd alone to put out a fire, where no one was being threatened. This was a foreseeable situation and a crucial tactical mistake that led to massive legal repercussions, let alone, of course, changing the lives for not only him, but many others that night. It was entirely avoidable. That is not a reason to convict him on any of the charges that still stand at this point. And this video is being filmed prior to the jury reaching any kind of verdict. So to be clear, I'm not making an argument for conviction on that. I see these issues as entirely divorced from one another. However, it doesn't change the fact that sound tactics and proper education and training to inform them, this would have been avoided rather easily. The purpose of this video is not to build an argument one way or another in favor of the prosecution or the defense. The purpose of this video is so that you, the viewer, can learn from this situation. I understand that not everybody has 80 hours to watch 2 weeks of trial and countless more hours to follow the various experts and all this sort of stuff, analyzing motions and mistrial motions, all this other kind of thing. I totally get that. I want to help break down real life situations so that you can learn from them and avoid other people's mistakes. Ultimately, I want to keep you safe both physically and legally. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, click the notification bell so that way you'll get notifications anytime we release a new video. Also click like, and I want to see your comments. What do you think Mr. Rittenhouse got right that night? What do you think Mr. Rittenhouse got wrong that night? Also, what kind of content do you want to see come from this channel? If we get some good feedback, rest assured we're going to be going that way with it. On behalf of not only myself, but everybody else who made this video possible, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this, and I look forward to continuing this project and this discussion.